"You're not supposed to be near my son," warned the CEO. But what the janitor said silenced her. "He's gone." The words hit Rowan Hartley like a punch to the chest. "What do you mean gone?" she snapped, turning so fast that her assistant nearly dropped the champagne flute in her hand. The assistant, wide-eyed trembling, lowered her voice. "Connor's not in the green room. He's not with the nanny. Security just checked the perimeter. He's missing." The ballroom erupted with polite applause as the governor stepped down from the stage, having praised the new Hartley-designed skyline project as the future of Manhattan. But all Rowan could hear was the rush of blood in her ears. This was not happening. Not today. Not during the most important moment of her career. Without a word, she tossed her cards onto the nearest table and marched through the crowd like a storm in high heels. The cameras caught her departure, but no one dared follow. Rowan burst into the green room, first empty, then the hallway calling his name. "Connor, sweetheart." No answer. She turned to security, voice cutting like a blade. "Lock down the building. Nobody in, nobody out." Now within minutes, the elegant event turned tense. The string quartet's melody faltered. Guests whispered. Someone in heels tripped on the marble as people began to murmur, "The Hartley boy is missing." Rowan's fists clenched. She refused to panic. Not in public, not in front of the cameras, not again, not like the last time. It was Winston, the head of facilities, who found the boy first. "I think you need to see this, ma'am," he said, adjusting his radio. He led Rowan down a narrow back corridor, past the catering kitchen, past the loading dock, down a grey staircase into the belly of the building, the maintenance level. The air grew colder, dustier, smelled faintly of oil and old wood, and there, in a small service room filled with broken furniture and old filing cabinets, sat her son, Connor, cross-legged on the floor, a Sharpie clenched in one small fist. He was drawing, not on paper, but directly onto a broken wooden desk, one leg missing the surface, cracked and uneven. And next to him, crouched low, tools in hand, was a man in a faded janitor uniform. Rowan stopped at the doorway, frozen. Her voice came out sharp. "What exactly is going on here?" The janitor didn't flinch. He looked up calmly like he'd been expecting her. "Your son didn't run away," he said, his voice low but steady. "He came here on purpose." "I didn't ask for your opinion," Rowan fired back. Connor looked up then, big hazel eyes blinking behind messy bangs. "Mama," he said softly. "He's helping me fix it." "The desk?" she asked, incredulous. "No, the plan," Connor whispered. "The plan in my head." She stepped forward, noticing the blueprint forming across the surface, an abstract but detailed sketch of a building with curved edges and soft contours unlike any she'd seen from her son before. It wasn't chaos. It was intentional. The janitor leaned back, wiping his hands on a rag. He said this was the only place where things feel quiet enough to think. "Who are you?" she demanded. He stood slowly, tall and solid. Brown hair touched with grey at the temples. Deep-set eyes like slate, calm but not indifferent. "Julian Stone, maintenance, night shift." "You're not supposed to be near children." He didn't react. "I didn't approach him. He found me. And he didn't need a supervisor. He needed a safe space." Rowan turned to Connor, heart pounding. "Sweetheart, why did you come down here? You scared everyone. You scared me." Connor didn't answer. He looked back at his drawing, quietly outlining a small rectangle near the top of the sketch, a window, then a tiny figure at the bottom. "Is that you?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "It's you looking out, but never coming home." The room went silent. Julian stepped back, giving them space. His presence was large, but he moved like someone used to disappearing. Rowan stared at the drawing. A tower, glass, steel, beautiful, empty. She felt her chest tighten. Connor's whisper broke the silence. "He told me, Not everything broken stays broken. Some things just need someone to sit with them long enough. She turned to Julian. "That your quote?" "No," he said. "That one belongs to the boy." Later, back in her car, Rowan sat in stunned silence as the city blurred past the tinted windows. Winston cleared his throat from the driver's seat. "Would you like me to file a formal report on the janitor, ma'am?" She didn't answer at first, then she said almost to herself, "No." Winston raised an eyebrow in the mirror. "I want you to pull his file instead," she added. "Everything from the beginning." And 3 floors below in the service corridor, no one noticed. Julian Stone wiped the last bit of ink off the desk, folded up Connor's half-finished blueprint, and placed it in a brown envelope. He didn't keep it for himself. He left it on the chair. Because some blueprints weren't meant to be owned, they were meant to be found. Rowan stared at the envelope on her desk. It was unmarked. No name, no seal, no memo paper, just a brown envelope placed silently by Winston, who said nothing, only gave her that quiet look that meant you asked for this. Inside 3 printed pages, 1 faded employee badge, and 1 sheet of handwritten notes. Julian Stone, age 38. Current night shift janitor, Hartley Properties. Previous structural engineer, city license inactive. Termination voluntary withdrawal from civil projects 2017. Filed. Personal reasons. Rumors. Lawsuit settled. Sealed. Reference. Former lead architect, Bellevue Children's Hospital project. Rowan leaned back in her chair. Children's Hospital. She flipped to the handwritten sheet. Notes in a clean, compact hand like blueprints in prose. Measurements of stress tolerances. Weight distribution, but then something softer. Note to self, replace flooring material in pediatric wing. Not strong enough to absorb impact if a child falls. Long-term risk, short-term cost. It wasn't engineering, it was concern. That shook her more than it should have. That night, she sat at the dinner table across from Connor. The penthouse was quiet. Too quiet. No staff tonight, no tutors, no therapists, just mother and son, separated by silence and a bowl of untouched pasta. She cleared her throat. "Connor, about earlier," he didn't look up. "You scared me today," she continued gently. "When I couldn't find you," I thought her voice trailed off. He poked at the pasta with his fork. "I didn't mean to make you worry, I just needed air. You could have said something. You don't like it when I talk during your meetings." Rowan felt the words slice straight through the air. No anger in his voice, just a fact. A statement she couldn't refute. "I'm trying to protect you," she said softly. Connor looked up, eyes direct. "From what?" And she didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense. Not one that wasn't just another wall she built with good intentions and hollow logic. He stood up, pushing his chair back. "Can I be excused?" She nodded, speechless. He disappeared into his room. The click of the door felt louder than thunder. Later that night, Rowan found herself wandering the halls of her building, heels in hand, barefoot on cold marble. The maintenance corridor still smelled like oil and wood and old secrets. She peeked into the service room again. The desk was still there, repaired. A post-it note taped to the top read, "If it breaks again, don't throw it out, it's still learning." She stared at the note. No signature, but she knew the handwriting. And for reasons she couldn't explain, her eyes watered. The next morning she called Winston. "Where does he usually work, Miss Hartley?" "Julian. Where's his normal shift?" "Subble 3. Utility tunnel. C. Usually cleans the old archival wing. No one goes down there. I want to talk to him." Winston paused. "You want to summon him?" Rowan gave him a look. I want to visit myself. It was colder underground. The walls were lined with silent pipes and flickering lights. She hated it immediately. Julian was scrubbing rust from a metal panel when she found him, headphones in, quiet, methodical. He didn't turn around. "You're really hard to fire, you know," Rowan said, arms crossed. He turned calm as ever, removed his headphones. "You came all the way down here just to threaten my job." She almost smiled. "I don't threaten, I remove quietly." Julian wiped his hands and faced her fully. "Then why are you here?" There it was again, that stillness in his voice. Not passive, just grounded. "I read your file," she said. He didn't flinch. "And I imagine you've come with questions. I've come with one." She stepped closer. "My son, he doesn't open up to anyone. Not tutors, not teachers, not me. But he sat with you for less than an hour, and he let you into his world." "Why?" Julian was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "Because I didn't ask him to explain who he was. I just let him be it." Rowan felt something in her chest shift. He continued gently. "He's not broken. He's not rebellious. He's just quiet, like blueprints before the ink sets. You have to look carefully, or you miss the real lines." She swallowed hard. "And what makes you so good at reading kids?" she asked. Julian glanced away. "I wasn't. Not until I failed one." He didn't elaborate. She didn't press. But the weight in his voice told its own story. That night Rowan stood at the window of her penthouse, staring out over the skyline. She designed glass and steel, cold and flawless, but something inside her had begun to itch, like a crack behind drywall. Invisible, but real, a discomfort she couldn't ignore. Her son had seen something she missed. Maybe Julian Stone wasn't just a janitor. Maybe he was a mirror. And maybe, just maybe, the reflection was more honest than she was ready to admit. It began with a quiet rebellion. Connor Hartley, age 8, brilliant and observant beyond his years, walked out of the third-floor gifted learner workshop without saying a word. Past the glass classrooms, past the assistant holding a clipboard, past the security guard who only noticed the boy after the elevator doors closed again. By the time Rowan received the call, Connor was already on Subble, the maintenance wing. No one but janitors and HVAC contractors ever entered. Rowan's heels clacked with fury across the concrete hallway. A young intern scrambled to keep up. He was supposed to be in the cognitive development lab, Rowan snapped. How does a child disappear from a biometric secured facility? The intern stammered. "We think he used the service stairs." She stopped, turned slowly. "That's not possible. Unless someone showed him how." Julian Stone didn't flinch when she burst into the boiler room. Connor was sitting cross-legged on the floor beside him, meticulously gluing tiny foam pieces onto a cardboard base. The outline of a small house was starting to form. Its walls were uneven, the roof slightly crooked, but it had a door. A real door cut out with precision, barely held by a hinge of tape. Julian didn't speak first. Neither did Rowan. But Connor did very softly. He remembered, "I liked the green roof." Rowan took a step forward. "Connor, you left class again." He kept gluing. Julian stood wiping his hands on his dark green apron. "He wasn't running away," he said calmly. "He was running toward quiet." Rowan's eyes narrowed. "This is the third time he's come down here. Fourth, actually. You're not helping your case." Julian met her gaze without flinching. "I'm not making a case, Miss Hartley, I'm just making space." That night, Rowan tried to talk to Connor during dinner. "What is it about him?" she asked. Why him? Connor didn't answer. He poked at his pasta eyes vacant. I'm trying to understand you, she added. But he only put down his fork and left the table again. The next morning Julian found Connor waiting for him before his shift began, sitting on the metal stairs near the old boiler tank, a roll of sketches in his lap. Julian sat beside him without a word. After a moment, Connor asked, "Do you ever hate noise?" Julian looked ahead. "I do. Some noise is just silence that hasn't made peace with itself." Connor nodded like he'd been waiting to hear that exact sentence his entire life. He pulled out a pencil. "I like building houses, but only when they don't echo." Julian watched the boy sketch in clean lines. No ruler. Then gently he asked, "Do lights ever feel too loud for you?" Connor nodded. "And fabrics, certain tags, or when someone taps their pen?" The boy winced. "It feels like my brain gets splashed." Julian smiled faintly. "Connor, that's called sensory processing sensitivity. It's like your senses have no filter. They catch everything, even things other people miss. Is that why school makes me tired?" "It's not school that's the problem," Julian said. "It's the way it's lit. The hum of the lights, the patterns on the walls. Your brain notices what others don't." Connor looked up. "Is it broken?" Julian's voice turned gentle. "No, kid. It's rare, it's sharp. It's not broken, but it needs a different kind of room to breathe." By mid-afternoon, Julian had pulled out an old 3D printer from storage. Covered in dust but functional. Together in a small corner of the abandoned archives room, they started creating a door frame, a window, a tree to go outside. The model took shape slowly, piece by piece. Julian watched Connor's face light up, a face that rarely made eye contact, now alive with purpose. "This house," Julian said. "What's it for?" Connor shrugged. "For someone who doesn't like shouting," Julian nodded. "Then let's make sure the walls don't echo." Meanwhile, Rowan sat in her penthouse office staring at the school's latest behavioral report. Withdrawn during class, unresponsive to group work, avoids eye contact, high pattern fixation, possibly on the spectrum, suggested evaluation declined. She closed the report. Something in her heart cracked. Was she building towers so tall? She couldn't see her own child anymore. Later that week, Julian stayed late. Connor had already gone home, but the model house remained. He opened a dusty toolbox, reaching into a worn envelope taped to the inside lid. Inside was an old blueprint, the first design he ever made. Pediatric Cancer Ward, Children's Hospital of Riverbend. His initials in the bottom right corner, JS, before the lawsuit, before the headlines, before the world forgot what he could build. He hadn't touched a real blueprint in over 5 years. But tonight he did. He added something small to Connor's model, a tiny swing under a tree made from wire and thread. Then he whispered, "For the boy who builds where others break." That same night, Rowan passed by Connor's room. He was asleep on the floor, curled next to his sketch pad. A foam miniature house sat on the carpet. No tablet, no screens, just silence. She picked up the house, turned it slowly in her hands. The door didn't quite fit. The chimney was crooked. But for the first time in years, Rowan saw something she hadn't seen in herself. A place trying to be soft again. She traced a tiny word etched in pencil on the underside of the model. Quiet means safe. Rowan stood frozen, the model house in her hands, its fragile walls trembling slightly with her grip. A green roof, a single window, and 3 miniature figures made of bent wire standing at the front door, one tall, one small, and one in a janitor's apron. She stared at the third figure. It was unmistakable. Julian, her jaw clenched. She stormed out of Connor's room and rode the elevator down without a word. Floor after floor blurred past as her reflection in the mirrored walls stared back at her, a woman who could control billion-dollar developments, but not her own child's inner world. She found Julian in the sub-workshop wiping grease off a pipe valve. The smell of solder and old dust clung to the air. He didn't flinch when she walked in. "Where is it?" she demanded. Julian looked up. "You'll have to be more specific." "The model," she snapped. "The one you helped him build. The one with you standing next to my son." Julian tilted his head. "That one." Rowan held it up. "This," she said, voice low and tight, "is not your place. My son is not some lost cause you get to fix with glue and foam. You don't know him." Julian stepped forward slowly, his tone calm. "I never said he was broken." "You think he needs saving?" "I think he needs space," Julian replied. "Space where he doesn't have to explain why bright lights hurt, or why silence feels safer than sound." Rowan's voice rose. "You've spent a few afternoons with him, and suddenly you think you understand." Julian didn't respond. Instead, he gestured to the model in her hands. "He built that," he said. "Every line, every angle. I just found him the quiet." She hesitated. "He talks to you." Julian nodded once. "Not in words, but he talks." Rowan looked at the miniature house again. Her fingers touched the edge of the door. "I give him everything," she whispered. "Tutors, therapy, top-tier education. What more?" "He doesn't need more," Julian said gently. "He needs longer. He needs someone who stays past the final bell. Someone who listens to the things he can't say yet." She looked up, eyes suddenly sharp again. "You think I don't listen?" "I think you hear noise," Julian said. "But not patterns." The words landed with a thud. Rowan stepped back. She was used to being challenged by boardrooms, rival CEOs, auditors. But not this man. Not the janitor with the steady hands and unshaken eyes. She looked around the workshop, boxes labeled discarded chairs, missing legs, toys with missing wheels, everything broken and yet carefully kept. "You fix things," she said almost to herself. Julian nodded. "Only the ones people still believe are worth fixing." Rowan's breath caught in her throat, and for a fleeting second she wanted to tell him about the nights Connor cried in his sleep, the mornings he wouldn't look at her, the drawings he'd crumple before she could even ask. But she didn't, because Rowan Hartley didn't admit cracks, not even to herself. So instead she said coldly, "Stay away from my son." Julian didn't argue. He only said he'll still find the quiet, whether I'm there or not. That night Rowan sat alone in her office. The skyline she'd designed sparkled outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. One of the blueprints on her desk for the Crown Meridian Tower was marked with red ink. The top floor redesign. Her pen hovered, but all she could see was Connor's model, the little swing Julian had added, the bent chimney, the crooked door. She reached for her phone. "Winston," she said, "I want you to do a background check, full profile on Julian Stone." There was a pause. "Is there a specific reason?" Rowan's eyes darkened. "Let's just say I don't like unfinished blueprints wandering around my son." The next morning she passed Connor in the hallway. He didn't meet her eyes, but he held a folded paper in his hand. Rowan kneeled. "Connor, what's this?" He didn't answer. She opened the paper. It was another drawing, a new house. This one taller, sleeker. But at the base were two silhouettes walking away, Only the small one remained. Alone. Her throat tightened. Connor whispered just once. "Not every house is a home." Then he walked away. Rowan stayed kneeling in the hallway long after he'd gone. And for the first time in a long time, she realized she knew how to build towers. But maybe, just maybe, she never learned how to stay in one. Rain fell in fine needles across the city, blurring lights and smearing shadows. From the corner office of Hartley and Crown, the skyline looked like a dream gone slightly out of focus. Rowan didn't notice. Her eyes were locked on a manila folder on her desk. The label read simply "Stone Julian Background Request." She stared at it like it was a ticking clock. Across the room Winston stood with his arms folded, the stiff collar of his work shirt crumpled at the edges, a sign he'd been in since dawn. Rowan finally spoke, quiet but clipped. "You said he used to be someone else?" Winston nodded. "Lead architect on the City of Mercy Children's Hospital project 10 years ago." She opened the folder. Newspaper headlines, court transcripts, photographs of scaffolding, blueprints marked in red. Then design flaw blamed for fatal accident, investigation points to oversight in load-bearing wall. Rowan turned the page. Julian's face, younger, less tired, stared back at her from a press release beside the word "indefinite suspension." Further down, "All charges dismissed. Cleared of negligence. Career unreoverable." She exhaled. "So he was innocent," she murmured. Winston shrugged. "Innocence doesn't build reputations back. The media crucified him before the jury ever spoke." Rowan stood. Her heels clicked once against the tile. "Why janitorial work?" she asked. "Why not rebuild, go somewhere else?" Winston's voice lowered. Maybe he wasn't trying to escape the world. Maybe he was just waiting for it to forget. That night, Rowan found herself outside the maintenance wing again. The hallway smelled of oil and pine cleaner. It was quiet. That kind of sacred quiet only buildings can hold when they think no one is listening. She turned a corner and paused. Julian was inside the old boiler room, kneeling, tightening a bolt on an exposed pipe. He hadn't shaved. There was grease on his jaw, but he moved like someone who still knew precision, like the blueprint still lived in his bones. Rowan knocked. Julian looked up, not startled, just resigned. "Here to check my mop for structural integrity?" he asked dryly. She didn't smile. Instead she stepped inside, held out the folder. He didn't take it. "I know," he said simply. Rowan froze. "I knew one day someone would open that door," Julian added. "Didn't know if it would be HR or you." Rowan opened the folder herself and read aloud. "Julian Stone cleared of all negligence. Structural flaw traced to last-minute contractor change. Why didn't you say any of this?" Julian sat back on his heels. "Because people don't read the full article," he said. "They read the headline. They see the photo. They make up the ending." There was a long silence. Then Rowan whispered, "A little girl died." Julian's face changed. Something behind his eyes cracked. "She was 6, he said. Her name was Evelyn. I met her the day before. She gave me a drawing, said it was her dream hospital. It had butterflies on the walls." Rowan lowered the folder. "I kept that drawing." Julian said, "It's the only blueprint I never had the heart to throw away." Rowan stood motionless. He looked up at her then, not with anger, not with pride, but with something that looked like surrender. "You think I'm trying to teach your son something," he said. But the truth is, I think he's the only one who doesn't see me as a ghost. Later that week, Rowan met with the board of Future Skyline. Numbers were up. The Dubai deal was nearing signature. Everything was textbook, except her hands couldn't stop tracing the corner of that same folder in her briefcase. That night, she found Connor asleep in bed, arms wrapped around a small model Julian had built for him. This one not of a house but of a hospital. A tiny paper butterfly sat on the roof. The next morning, Rowan stood outside the elevator with Julian, who was adjusting a light fixture overhead. She cleared her throat. He glanced down. "I want to give you something," she said. He raised a brow. "Another HR warning." She held out a slip of paper. It was wrinkled but carefully folded. A drawing. A child's drawing of a house. 3 figures again, but this time. The third was holding blueprints. Connor's handwriting. "Thank you for showing me where ideas live." Julian didn't speak. Rowan looked at him and finally said the words that had been resting heavy just under her breath. "I was wrong." He blinked. "I judged you for a past I didn't understand, and I kept my son from someone who saw him when I couldn't." Julian shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." "I'm not saying it for you," she said softly. "I'm saying it because I need to become the kind of mother who would." They stood there in silence, 2 people from different floors of the world. But in that moment, on the same level, back in her office, Rowan stared at the skyline again. The tallest towers always impressed the world, but somehow what stayed in her mind was a little girl's butterfly and a janitor who still remembered her name. Rowan found the drawing folded neatly beneath Connor's pillow. At first glance it looked like any other child's sketch: crooked lines, uneven windows, a tree that leaned slightly too far to the left. But what stopped her cold was the note scribbled at the bottom in light, tentative pencil. Not tallest, just safest. She stared at it for a long time. 3 stick figures stood in front of the little house, one tall with sharp shoes, clearly her. One shorter with curly hair, Connor, and between them a man with a beard holding what looked like a blueprint. Connor had drawn Julian again. She folded the paper carefully like something sacred. Later that morning, Rowan sat at the breakfast table across from her son. He was spooning cereal into his mouth, absent-mindedly, eyes still sleepy. The silence between them was almost habitual by now, until she slid the drawing onto the table. "Connor," she asked gently, "who's the third person in the picture?" He didn't look up, but his spoon paused. Rowan waited. After a moment he said quietly, "He understands when I'm quiet." Her heart pinched. "And the house?" She continued, keeping her voice even. "You wrote, 'It's not the tallest, just the safest.'" Connor nodded slowly. "Tall buildings fall more when they crack." Rowan blinked. "He taught me that," Connor added, "but I already knew it." She looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time, it hit her how often she'd missed the world behind her son's silences. How many conversations he'd had without ever speaking, and how easily Julian had stepped into that space. "Do you know," she whispered, "that's the most important thing anyone's ever said to me." Connor glanced up, confused. "Why?" "Because I think," she said, blinking back tears, "I've been building the wrong kind of buildings my whole life." That afternoon, Rowan stood outside the boiler room again. Her heels echoed on the concrete floor, but she didn't hesitate this time. Julian was bent over an old radiator, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sweat glinting on his temple. He looked up and straightened, surprised. "No mop in sight?" she teased softly. "Should I be worried?" Julian gave a half-smile. Depends. You here as CEO or as someone's mom? She stepped inside. Maybe both. There was a pause. She inhaled. I owe you something, Rowan said. He raised an eyebrow. An apology. She clarified. And something more. Julian's face remained unreadable. She continued, her voice low. I've spent years building towers that look impressive, but none of them have windows that open, none of them let the light in. Julian leaned against the workbench. You know, he said slowly, Connor doesn't need much, just space to breathe. A place where he doesn't have to explain himself to be accepted. I know, Rowan said, and I've been giving him the opposite. There was a pause. Julian wiped his hands on a rag. You're not the only one who's gotten lost in blueprints. Rowan looked at him. What do you mean? Julian hesitated. Then he crossed the room and opened a drawer. He pulled out a carefully folded piece of tracing paper and placed it on the workbench between them. It was a design, a home, not tall, not flashy, simple, warm. There was a ramp by the front steps, a sunroom, a garden tucked behind sliding doors. Rowan recognized the layout from one of Connor's models. Julian touched the corner of the paper gently. This was for my sister, he said. After the accident, she couldn't climb stairs anymore. I spent 6 months designing a place where everything felt like freedom. Rowan didn't speak. Julian looked at her. She never got to live in it. Rowan's voice was soft. Why not? I couldn't afford to build it after I lost my license, he said simply. And by the time I had the means, she was already in long-term care. Rowan closed her eyes. I'm sorry. Julian shrugged. You learn to live with the foundations you never poured. That evening, Rowan returned to her office. She stared at the blueprints for future skyline, all 23 towers stacked and labeled and perfect. Then she looked down at Connor's drawing again. Not tallest, just safest. She picked up the phone. The next morning, Julian arrived to find his workspace cleaner than usual. Waiting on the table was a folder. Inside, an official letter of contractor reinstatement signed by the board of Hartley and Crown, and below it, a sticky note in Rowan's handwriting. Sometimes the world doesn't need another skyscraper. Sometimes it needs someone who knows how to build a home. Julian sat down. For the first time in years, he let himself smile. That weekend, Connor and Julian worked together on a new project, building a miniature community of homes on a slab of plywood. Not just one house now, but a street, a park, a school. Rowan stopped by and watched them from the doorway. Julian caught her gaze. I hope you know, he said softly. I'm not here to replace anything. Rowan stepped forward. No, she said, but you might be the missing part I didn't know we needed. They stood there, 3 people, in a basement that suddenly felt like the heart of a home. Connor handed Julian a small cutout he'd made, just a door. No house is finished without a way in, the boy said. Julian smiled. Then let's build that first. Rowan Hartley sat at the head of the conference table, back, straight expression unreadable. On the screen behind her, a tabloid headline burned like a brand. CEO mother lets janitor mentor her son. The same janitor accused in hospital death scandal. The room was heavy with silence. Corporate calculating silence. One of the board members finally spoke. We understand personal matters can become entangled, but this is threatening our global partnerships. A second voice followed. Our Dubai investors are spooked. They want a public distancing. Immediate removal of Mr. Stone from any association with Hartley and Crown. Rowan folded her hands tightly in her lap to hide the tremble. The article is misleading. Julian Stone was cleared of any wrongdoing. You all saw the file I shared. Another member leaned forward. That doesn't matter to the media. Perception is reality, and we cannot afford a scandal not weeks before the future skyline groundbreaking. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words tangled somewhere behind her ribs. She wasn't sure if it was anger or something closer to grief. That night she sat across from Connor at the dinner table. The boy picked at his plate. His appetite vanished along with the light in his eyes. "Connor," she tried gently, "we need to talk about something." He looked up, but he didn't speak. "I've been asked to change a few things at work, for the company, for our investors." Still nothing. Just the dull clink of a fork against ceramic. "They want Julian gone," she finally said. "They think it's best for everyone." He set his fork down. The pause that followed was sharper than any scream. "I thought you said he fixed things," Connor whispered. "I did." "Then why are you breaking it?" Her heart ached. "It's not that simple, it is to me." He slid off the chair and walked out. No tantrum, no yelling, just silence. The kind that breaks you more than any words ever could. The next morning she opened her office to find a drawing on her desk. Connor's hand again. A house same as before, but this time a crack ran down the middle of it like a fault line, and beneath it in pencil 4 words, "Too tall, it broke." She held the paper to her chest and cried. At the basement level, Julian stood at his usual post cleaning a broken vent when Winston approached unusually stiff. "Got a moment?" Julian turned. "Sure," Winston sighed. "I hate being the messenger, but it's the board. They're forcing Rowan's hand. The article spooked investors. She's being backed into a corner." Julian didn't flinch, didn't curse. He just nodded slowly. "I figured it was coming," he said. Winston frowned. "You're just going to let it happen?" Julian gave a sad smile. "Some people fight with noise. I've learned to fix things quietly." He wiped his hands and turned back to the vent. "And sometimes," he added, "the kindest thing you can do is step back so someone else doesn't have to fall." That evening, Julian didn't show up for his shift. Connor waited outside the maintenance room for over an hour. Knees pulled up to his chest, sketchbook untouched. Rowan found him there just after 7. "He's not coming, is he?" the boy asked without looking up. She knelt beside him. "No, he's not. Because of you." She swallowed hard. "Yes." There was a long silence. Connor finally turned to her. "You told me houses need strong foundations." "They do. Then why does it feel like ours just cracked?" She didn't know what to say. So she wrapped her arms around him and let herself be the soft place he could finally fall into. In her bedroom that night, Rowan stared at the news feed glowing from her phone. Stock fluctuations, op-eds, speculations about H. Hartley and Crown's leadership. Nothing she hadn't weathered before, but one tweet caught her eye. "She builds towers that reach the clouds but couldn't protect the man who built her son's world." She powered the phone off. The next morning, Connor refused to speak. He got ready in silence, ate in silence, entered the car in silence. The driver looked at Rowan through the rear-view mirror, unsure. She glanced at her son. "We're going to a new school today," she said softly, "the one in Connecticut with the best gifted program in the country." Connor didn't respond. "They'll take good care of you, lots of space, smart kids like you, you'll thrive there." He turned his head toward the window, voice barely audible. "Do they fix cracks and drawings too?" Rowan closed her eyes. By the time she arrived back at the office, the halls felt colder. The space Julian once occupied was spotless. Too spotless. Gone were the blueprints, the model homes, the sketches pinned to the corkboard. It was as if he'd never been there at all. Except for one thing. Taped to the underside of his old desk drawer was a sticky note. Faint pencil lines. Julian's handwriting. You can build the world or you can belong to it, but never both. She folded the note with shaking fingers and slipped it into her blazer. The foundation was cracking, and for the first time in years, Rowan wasn't sure if she could fix it. Julian Stone disappeared the way rain fades. Quiet, unnoticed, but leaving everything just a little heavier. He didn't clear out his locker, didn't send a note. No goodbyes to Winston. No parting words to the boy who had once traced his blueprints with trembling fingers. He was just gone. And Connor Hartley knew the moment he walked into the maintenance wing and saw the lights off, the smell of turpentine replaced by sterile nothingness. He knew Julian wasn't coming back. He stood in the middle of the room, backpack sliding off one shoulder, eyes glazed. Winston, standing at the far end with a wrench in hand, saw him. "I'm sorry, kid," he said gently. He didn't want to say goodbye. Connor didn't cry. He just turned and walked out. At home, Rowan noticed it immediately. No blueprint sketches on the fridge, no models cluttering the kitchen table, no questions, no humming, no quiet footsteps in the hallway at 2 a.m. looking for glue or rulers, just stillness. It was worse than any tantrum. It was surrender. That night, as she passed by his bedroom, she saw him curled in bed, fully dressed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. She stepped inside. "Connor," she said softly. No response. She sat on the edge of the bed, reaching to brush a curl from his forehead. "I know you miss him." His voice was. "You said he'd ruin everything." Rowan's hand froze. Connor turned to face her, expression hollow, but he was the only thing that ever made sense. Her throat burned. "I was trying to protect you. You broke the only thing that wasn't broken." He turned away, and Rowan, CEO of billion-dollar skylines, couldn't fix a single inch of the space between them. 2 days passed. 3. Rowan buried herself in investor meetings, desperate to recapture the narrative. She said all the right things, presented graphs, smiled through boardroom tension, signed 2 additional international contracts. But every time she returned home to silence and saw Connor's untouched sketchbook, something in her cracked a little deeper. On the 4th day she passed by the study. Julian's model still sat there, dusty, pushed behind a row of old books. She hadn't thrown it out, hadn't dared to. That night, unable to sleep, she found herself pulling it forward. It was a small structure, cardboard roof, toothpick beams, hand-drawn wallpaper with crooked lines and windows too large for proportion. It was imperfect, and somehow it was everything. She turned it over, and that's when she saw it beneath the base, lightly carved in pencil, almost invisible, unless you were looking for it, "For the boy who taught me to believe again." Rowan felt the breath catch in her throat. She pressed the model to her chest, and for the first time in years, she cried, not out of anger, not from stress or shame, but from the ache of realizing she had chosen reputation over redemption. The next morning, Connor was gone, his bed untouched, school uniform hanging neatly on the chair. No sign of struggle, no notes, no signs of packing, just absence. Rowan's heart seized. "Connor," she called, panic already rising. She tore through the apartment, balcony, closet, guest room. Security was alerted. Building-wide search initiated. Police informed. 15 minutes later, her driver confirmed Connor had slipped out at dawn on foot alone. He was 8 years old and he had vanished. By 2 p.m., the city was on alert. Amber notifications flashed across traffic signs. The media, always hungry for a fall from grace, had a new headline. Hartley air missing last seen. After Janitor scandal, Rowan sat in her office, knees shaking, voice breaking as she spoke to police. Winston burst through the door. I think I know where he went. The train station in the Bronx was small, quiet, a single track with peeling paint and the smell of old metal. Rowan and Winston arrived just as the afternoon train rolled away, and sitting on a bench under a crooked lamppost was Connor. Next to him, a familiar figure, calloused hands, faded blue uniform, a thermos in his lap, Julian. Rowan's breath caught. She took a step forward but stopped herself. Instead she watched. Connor was talking, not animated, not excited, but his hands moved, his shoulders relaxed, his eyes weren't empty. Julian listened. Not lecturing, not fixing, just listening. Finally Rowan stepped forward. Julian looked up. I didn't tell him to come, he said calmly. He just showed up. Rowan nodded. Her voice was barely above a whisper. How did he know you'd be here? Julian glanced at Connor, then back at her. Because this is the first place he saw someone stay. Connor looked up at his mother. I wanted to find something that didn't leave. Rowan knelt before him. Her voice trembled. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I thought I was keeping you safe. You were keeping me small. She blinked. He made me feel big. Julian stood picking up the thermos. I can go, he said softly. Rowan shook her head. No, not this time. Julian studied her. Her eyes weren't steel today. They were glass, fragile, human. I didn't want to break him, she whispered. You didn't, Julian said. You just forgot what holds a house up. They rode the train back together, 3 figures side by side, and for the first time, no one said a word. Because the silence didn't hurt anymore, it held them like a blueprint beginning to take shape again. The rain had come and gone by the time they stepped off the train. A faint drizzle clung to the air like a breath not quite released. Rowan held Connor's hand tighter than she had in years, her other hand resting on the back of his backpack, as if anchoring him to her side. Julian walked beside them, a quiet presence, neither leading nor following. He didn't ask questions. He didn't explain. He simply guided them through the sleepy streets of a suburb Rowan had only seen in reports and zoning maps. The cab ride from the station was brief, winding past small parks and homes that leaned with age but stood with grace. They pulled up to a low brick building with a wooden sign, Whispering Pines Residential Care. It wasn't the kind of place CEOs visited, but it was where Julian lived, or at least where he stayed. The air inside was a warm smelling of lavender oil and old paperbacks. Soft piano music drifted from a distant room. A nurse with kind eyes gave Julian a knowing smile as they passed. She's out in the garden, she said. He's been helping her fold the cranes. Rowan blinked. The what? Julian didn't answer. He simply led them through the hallway past faded portraits and a small bookshelf of used children's novels to a sunlit door at the back. The garden was small, overgrown, but loved. There, beneath a trellis wrapped in wisteria, sat a woman in a wheelchair. Her hair was the same shade of chestnut as Julian's, though streaked with silver now. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded a sheet of white origami paper. Connor was beside her, focused tongue caught between his teeth, folding his own. Julian didn't speak. He just watched them from the threshold. Rowan felt the weight of something unspeakable settle over the scene. Connor looked up. "Mom?" he said softly. "This is Maggie." The woman turned. Her smile was lopsided but radiant. "Hello, Connor's mom," she said with effort. Rowan stepped forward slowly. "Hello, Maggie." Julian knelt beside her chair, adjusting a blanket on her lap. "She's my older sister," he said quietly. "She was in a car crash 12 years ago. Drunk driver. She's been here ever since." Rowan's lips parted, but no words came. "I moved closer after the trial," Julian continued. "I come every other day. On the others, I fix things." He glanced at Rowan. "Not just desks." Rowan looked at Connor, then back at Julian. "And he knew about this?" he asked. Julian said, "And I told him the truth." Rowan's throat tightened. "You let my son meet your family before I did." Julian didn't flinch. "You built towers," he said. "I built tables, but he came to mine first." The line landed like a stone in still water. Connor stood holding a paper crane in his hands. She said, "Every crane is a wish," he said, offering it to his mother. "This one's for you." Rowan knelt and took it, her fingers brushing his. "What's the wish?" Connor shrugged. "That you'll stay this time." Back in the car, Rowan was silent. Julian leaned forward from the passenger seat. "You don't owe me anything." She looked at him. "Don't flatter yourself," she said. He smirked. "You're angry." "I'm not," she said. "I'm furious at what?" "At myself," she said, voice low. "For not realizing sooner that my son was starving for something I didn't even know how to give." Julian didn't respond. Rowan looked out the window. Connor never needed more tutors. He needed someone who saw the things he didn't say. Julian finally turned to her. "You see them now. Too late." He shook his head. "You came looking." She exhaled. "He trusts you. I trust him." Rowan hesitated. "And do you trust me?" Julian smiled, gentle, sad, honest. "I think you're still figuring out if you do." Rowan looked away. That one hurt because it was true. That evening back at the penthouse, Connor returned to his sketch pad. No castles, no glass towers. He drew a single-story house, a porch swing, 3 chairs, and a dog they didn't have. Rowan watched from the doorway, heart caught in her throat. Later that night, she stood in her office, staring at the contract from Dubai on her desk, a gold pen beside it. The board expected her signature by morning. The deal meant a 40% expansion, international recognition, and a feature in Forbes. She picked up the pen, and then she didn't. The next morning Winston walked into Julian's old workshop and paused. There on the desk was a single folded blueprint. On it, drawn in thick pencil, not the tallest, just the safest, and beneath it, "Build what matters. The rest is noise." The media hall was suffocating with flashbulbs and calculated smiles. Rowan Hartley stood behind the podium, back ramrod straight, clad in her signature black blazer. The skyline glistened through the glass panels behind her, the city she had shaped piece by piece. And yet, for the first time, she felt like a visitor in her own story. The Dubai deal file sat on the podium, signed but not submitted. Her assistant had double-checked every detail. The press was prepped, investors waited. She took a slow breath. The mic crackled. "I was raised to believe that skyscrapers were proof of success." She began, her voice steady, measured. "The higher we built, the more we mattered." A pause. Camera shutters clicked like ticking clocks. But then she said, eyes scanning the crowd, "My son drew me a house." The audience hushed, a simple one. 1 story, 3 chairs, no elevators, no boardrooms, just safety. She looked down, fingers tracing the edge of the contract she was supposed to endorse. "I've built towers," she said, voice softening. "But my son built a home. And the man who taught him, that he fixed more than a broken desk. He fixed us. A ripple moved through the crowd. She smiled. Not the PR smile, but something smaller and real. "I won't be signing this contract," Rowan said. Gasps, murmurs. "I won't expand for the sake of expansion. I won't trade time with my son for headlines. And I won't fire the man who reminded me what foundations are made of." A reporter in the front row raised her hand, shocked. "You're canceling a $2 billion deal." For a janitor, Rowan didn't flinch. "I'm keeping a promise and redefining success." Then she did what no one expected. She stepped down from the podium, literally walked past the press, straight into the hall where Connor waited with Winston, his small hands clutching a crumpled drawing, the same house he'd sketched weeks ago. The lines now traced in bold marker, stronger, permanent. An hour later, the story hit the wires. CEO rejects billion-dollar deal to reclaim her family. Some board members resigned, others panicked. But by the end of the day, Hartley Group's shares had risen. Why? Because people were hungry for truth. For stories not airbrushed for quarterly reports. Because somewhere in 1,000 homes, parents turned off their phones and sat beside their kids on the floor. Because what Rowan said next on Good Morning America went viral overnight. You don't need to build the tallest tower to be remembered. Sometimes the quietest homes hold the loudest legacies. That evening Julian sat in his sister's room, helping her adjust the blanket on her lap. The soft hum of the news played in the background. "Maggie?" he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "She did it." His sister blinked, then smiled. "She found the door," she said slowly. Julian tilted his head. "What door?" Maggie looked at him, eyes shining. "The one you kept open." 3 days later a letter arrived at Whispering Pines. It wasn't a job offer. It was a blueprint drawn by Connor, signed by Rowan, titled in crooked handwriting, "The Shelter Project." It came with a note. "We're designing homes for kids with disabilities. I want you on the team, not as a janitor, as an architect of hearts. And by the way, Connor says, this time you don't get to disappear." Back at the Hartley building, things began to change. Connor had his own desk now smack in the middle of Rowan's glass-walled office. His sketches taped along the edges. No more tutors, just time. Rowan had traded her black heels for sneakers. Julian walked the halls again, but this time with the clipboard blueprints in hand, Winston by his side. People still whispered. Some didn't understand, but most they smiled because deep down they knew this wasn't just a redemption story. It was a redefinition. On a quiet Friday evening, Rowan walked into her son's room. He was finishing a new drawing. "Working on something?" she asked. Connor nodded. "It's our house version too." She leaned in. There were still 3 chairs, but this time there was a 4th. She blinked. "Who's that one for?" Connor shrugged. "Maybe someone who visits. Maybe someone who stays." Rowan sat beside him, her voice almost a whisper. "What if they all stayed?" Connor looked at her, his words slow, deliberate. "Then we build bigger." The sun broke gently over the edge of the hill, casting soft golden lines through the windows of a modest single-story home nestled in the heart of upstate New York. No skyscrapers in sight, just open sky, trees swaying to a quiet rhythm, and the scent of freshly cut wood and morning toast. Inside, laughter echoed off walls not yet painted. Rowan Hartley was barefoot, kneeling on the kitchen floor, helping Connor unpack boxes labeled in childish scroll, kitchen stuff, and mom's spices. She held up a cracked ceramic mug. "Did we pack this?" she asked, eyebrows raised. Connor grinned. "It's Julian's," he said. Coffee tastes more honest than ugly cups. Rowan chuckled, wiping dust from the counter. Then it's a perfect fit. A soft knock at the door. Connor's face lit up before she could turn around. He's here. The front door opened with a creak that didn't sound like where. It sounded like welcome. Julian stepped inside, holding a roll of blueprints under one arm and a bag of groceries in the other. His usual navy janitor shirt was gone, replaced by a simple collared linen one. There was still paint on his knuckles. "You two move faster than the Hartley board ever did," he said, placing the groceries down. "I almost tripped over a sidewalk, not even poured yet." Rowan smirked. It's not a house until someone stubs a toe. He handed her a small potted plant for the windowsill. Connor said, "You've never kept one alive?" She raised an eyebrow. "So you bring me another one?" "Call it hope," Julian replied with a half smile. Connor reached for the blueprints. "Did you finish it?" Julian unrolled the pages on the dining table. They revealed a simple but brilliant plan: ramps instead of stairs, wide door frames, and sensory-sensitive lighting. Every inch thought out for children with needs that were too often ignored. At the top, bold letters read, "The Shelter Project, Phase 1, designed by Julian Stone and co-designer Connor Hartley." "Looks like a lot of people are going to sleep better because of you," Rowan said, tracing a finger across the lines. Julian shook his head gently. "No, because of us." Later that afternoon they gathered in the backyard. A folding table was covered in mismatched plates. Rowan grilled sandwiches while Julian repaired a crooked birdhouse with Connor. A breeze carried the scent of tomato soup and wild flowers. As they sat down, Connor brought something from his room, the old drawing he made months ago. The house, 3 chairs, only now there were 4. He placed it on the wall with a single strip of tape. Rowan looked at it, blinking back tears. "Permanent marker this time." Connor nodded. "I'm done erasing." Julian leaned back, eyes on the sketch. "It's not the tallest design I've ever seen," he said softly. "But it might be the strongest." Rowan looked at him, a smile behind her quiet gaze. Because it stayed, Julian didn't answer. He didn't need to. As evening descended, the backyard was lit by string lights strung lazily from tree to fence. Connor lay on a blanket, pointing constellations out to Julian, while Rowan leaned in the doorway, coffee in hand. "Yes, the ugly mug. You know," she said, joining them at last, "the city still calls. They want me to bid on another tower." Julian raised an eyebrow. "You going to?" She looked at Connor, who was now fast asleep, arms wrapped around a rolled-up sketchbook, like it was a stuffed animal. "No," she whispered. "I already helped build the most important one." Julian looked at her, his voice low. "Sometimes the most powerful things aren't built with steel, but with the decision to stay." Rowan smiled. "Then stay a beat." "Are you asking?" "No," she said. "I'm just hoping." He didn't promise. He didn't have to. He just reached for her hand, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. They sat in silence as the crickets sang, and the lights glowed warm above them. Weeks later, Rowan stood in front of a class of young architects to be guest speaker. Unexpectedly at ease, she held up a photo of the Shelter Project team, Julian covered in sawdust, Connor in oversized goggles, herself, laughing in a hoodie and jeans. "Blueprints are lines, ink on paper," she told the room. "But the real architecture of life that's built in the quiet, in patience, in people who don't walk away." She paused, letting the truth land. "You can build tall, you can build fast, but build honest. And if you're lucky, build something that stays." Back home the walls were no longer empty. They were full of color, scribbles, plans, mistakes, progress. On one of them, hung with quiet pride, was Connor's original drawing, now framed. Under it, in Julian's careful handwriting, a single sentence: "Not the tallest building, just the one that stayed," and beside it, a fifth chair, just in case. Sometimes the most powerful blueprints are the ones we never draft on paper. They're drawn in patience, in presence, and in the quiet choices to stay when walking away would have been easier. So tell me, where are you watching this story from today? Drop your city or country in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story touched something in your heart, if it reminded you that healing can begin with something as simple as showing up, then don't keep it to yourself. Share your thoughts below. Share this story with someone who needs a little hope. And if you believe the world needs more stories like this, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Because here we build more than just stories. We build reminders of what matters most. Thank you truly for being here. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and stay